Hi everyone, my name is Michael Long and I am the author of Kids on the March, 15 stories of speaking out, protesting, and fighting for justice. And here's a picture of the cover of the book. Look at the passion on those kids' faces. The photo was taken from the 2018 March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C. And those kids were from Parkland, Florida, who decided to demonstrate for safety in schools following a horrific shooting at their own school in Florida. Before I get into all that, I'd like to say hi to all of you teachers of English. Typically, I don't wear a jacket in my office, but if there's anything I learned in life, it's don't mess around with teachers of English. Big shout out to all of you, though. I can tell you that a teacher of English inspired me in 11th grade to consider becoming a writer. She told the class that I was the most improved writer of the year. I started with a D, and I'm not sure what I ended up with, maybe a C minus. But I found her very inspiring, and she was very affirming for me when I was working on my writing. So thanks to Mrs. Burge, and thank you to all of you for being at the vanguard of the fight for good writing and good English in the United States. So thank you. Truly, I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm here to give you a brief description of the book and then to tell you a little bit about what it might mean for teens today. The book really is my response in some ways to my own history lessons, the lessons that I learned in school through the years. When I studied U.S. history, it was usually romp from war to war to war. And I never really learned about all the fabulous protests that took place throughout U.S. history. And so what I do in this book is I try to elevate these protests and give voice to those who have been voiceless in our history books. But what I try to do especially is give voice to the teens and the kids who've been at the vanguard, to use that word again, at virtually every social movement in U.S. history. I mean that. They've been at the front, marching and rallying for every major advance in social justice throughout U.S. history. And what I do, especially in this book, is look at protests in the 20th century and the 21st century. Protests that were led by kids, that kids participated in, that kids gave life to, and the stories are dramatic. The book's not didactic. I try not to be didactic. My English teachers told me that. And so I use narrative. I tell stories of kids who have struggled for a better United States, for a better world, for a world marked by peace and justice and human dignity. And when I started the 20th century, I started with the March of the Mill Children. And these were kids from textile mills in Philadelphia who wanted shorter days, decent lunches, and breaks. And they marched from Philadelphia to President Roosevelt's home in Oyster Bay, New York. It's really a history-making march that I never learned about in school. So I start with that march, and then I go through about 12, actually 15 marches, and I end up with the George Floyd protests that happened just this year in the United States, where kids, again, were at the front of the marches and rally and protests. So just to give you a little indication of the protests that I discuss in the book, these include the March of the Mill Children, the Bonus March, a strike for a better school led by some kids in Virginia in 1951, the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, Alabama, the fight for free speech that took place in 1965 is a beautiful story of two kids, the Tinker Kids, who decided to wear black armbands to their school and were suspended because of that protest. They fought it. The battle went to the Supreme Court and they won. And so today, when kids protest for free speech in the United States, it's because of the path that was cleared for them by Mary Beth Tinker and her brother John Tinker. Some of the others include marches for justice for Trayvon Martin, the Women's March in 2018, marches for climate justice. You know the name Greta Thunberg. Well, I also look at Alexandria Villaseñor, who is a United States activist based in New York City, and the way she galvanized the country to fight against climate change. I also look at marches by dreamers, people who were brought to this country as children from another country and who are looking for a better life here and want to stay here and work and study. And so I look at their protests as well. The stories in this book are breathtaking. I found them inspiring. And one of the things that inspired me most, quite frankly, is that the kids have been so prevalent in these protests. I never realized until I sat down and started studying and researching for this book how prevalent kids have been as our country has struggled against injustice and as it has struggled to be good and to make real the promises in our founding documents, in the Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. As we've sought to realize the promises in those documents, kids have really been the ones who have been pushing us when we adults have failed them to become the United States of America that we see in these documents. You know, it's almost cliche now to say that we live in a divided society, and in many ways that's true. And one of these divisions that's largely hidden is the division between adults and kids. Often, if you're like me, you might see kids as empty vessels into which we pour things. But through this book, I really try to encourage us to see kids as free agents, as agents who've assumed control of their lives and who have decided, when we've failed them, to fight back for their own rights and for a better country. I think you'll be as inspired as I've been studying these kids. What's relevant, especially now for these kids, in this book, is that it gives them a sense that they're not alone in their protests, that they stand in this mighty river of protests that extend far back in U.S. history, and that's also moving forward as well. It gives kids a sense that they're not alone. It also gives them a sense of instruction. There are some really specific strategies in this book that kids can adopt, especially teens, that they can adopt if they want to lead their own protests for social justice and human dignity and peace. And then finally, I'd say that the book is just inspiring. It gives us the courage and hope that we need to battle alone, especially when we lose battles, especially when kids lose battles, and a lot of battles that kids fight and that we fight for social justice, we lose. But in these stories, we can see people who have lost and gotten back up and fought on. And we can see stories of people, of kids, who have also won their fights dramatically. And so I believe that for teens today, this book will give instruction, inspiration, and also a sense that they're not alone in this great fight. I hope they're not alone, partly because you're with them as well, and that you'll inspire them to take up this book and to read it and to continue the fight for a better America, for a world marked by peace and justice and human dignity. Thanks to all of you for your hard work with these kids. I'm eternally grateful for my English teachers, and I suspect that your kids, because you're watching this video, will be and are as grateful to you as I am. Thank you very much.